So there are different types of persistence. One is never give up, and you don't look back and it's just like, oh, this is going to work, and having a blind belief. That is wrong. Persistent as in, what else can I try? How do I survive to another day, to live another day or fight another day is a different. I'm that second, I'm the later one where, okay, if this didn't work, then how do I change something? Either the business or either the way I'm presenting or the way I'm positioning it. There's so many different permutations and combinations you can try before you say, oh, this is dead end.
Hi everyone, I'm your host Rohit Bhargava and you are listening to episode 189 of the Startup Playbook podcast, a weekly series where I sit down with successful tech founders, investors and operators to unpack their journey, lessons and insights to help current and future entrepreneurs. The voice that you heard a little bit earlier was that of our guest for this episode, Jalal Shaik. Jalal was the founder and CEO of Gameface.AI, which used AI and machine learning to provide performance insights into sports. In 2021, they were acquired for $33 million after raising just $1.2 million in funding. Despite their success, it's been a rocky journey for Jalal. And in this episode, he opens up about the ups and downs of his journey, lessons that he learned through the hard way through the acquisition process, and much more. Without further ado, here is my interview with Jalal Shaik. Hi, Jalal. Welcome to the Startup Playbook podcast, and thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
Thanks, Rohit. Thanks for having me here.
We caught up at a dinner recently, and we were talking about how, I think it was like 2017, 2018, when we first met at Jason Calacanis' launch accelerator program.
Yeah.
So a long time coming. We've known each other for a while. But for those people that may not be as familiar with you and your background, do you want to share a little bit about your story and what got you here today?
My name is Jalal Shaik, founder and CEO of Gameface.AI. It's a sports analytics startup. And we recently had an exit, and yeah, that's why I'm here for the show.
Short and sharp. Well, I mean, we've had multiple conversations over the years. You know, one of the things that you spoke about was growing up in India, and you actually worked for a startup over there as well. But do you want to maybe talk a little bit about your background and upbringing?
Yeah, funny story. So my parents worked for central government, pretty much in a community mixed with a lot of different religions and perspectives and from various parts of the world, parts of India. So I had a mixed, really good childhood with perspectives and friends from different modes of life and stuff. And then my professional journey, I started working with a chip company in Bangalore. And my first job was to write device driver code, which is like essentially software to make the chip work, right? So, and that's how I got into tech, because the background story for that is when I was studying engineering, I reached out to my seniors and asked them, what's the cool thing in tech to do? And what's the like really good thing in tech? Once you start off on that journey, you're going to do well. And they're like, just get into device driver programming because that's the toughest thing to do. And I took that as a challenge. And that's how my career began, as writing software for chips and embedded systems. And at the time, it was like early 2000s when the IBMs and the NVIDIAs and ARMs and were like really good. And Bangalore at that time was the hub for all these companies to find good coders, and it was predominantly embedded systems. So I got started with that, and the first company I worked was VXL, and then I moved to Connexa, which is another chip company in Hyderabad. And the funny thing about my career is I've worked with like 4 or 5 companies, and all the 4 or 5 companies have got acquired. Seriously.
Great track record.
Yeah, so I worked with Connexa, and that got acquired by NXP Semiconductors. And then I moved to Bangalore again and started working with Wind, which is a defense software. And that got acquired by Intel. And then after that, I moved to a startup called Bridgego, which was my last job before I moved to Australia. And that company got acquired by SMSC Microsystems. So all the companies I worked got acquired for some reason. And that's my background on my tech stuff.
Yeah, I mean, even prior to that, and I think what we probably initially connected over was you loved sport.
Yes.
As well, and you played a lot of sport. And I remember you telling me a story about how, Indian background sport is fun, but you have to take your studies really importantly. And your kind of dad or parents pushed you into taking studies more seriously and going to IIT?
Yeah. So my Indian parents, they're very competitive. And then there's a lot of this culture about, oh, look at that kid, he's doing so well, and that kid's gone to IIT and he's doing so well. So that is like part of growing up in India. It is very competitive. So my parents pushed me to study. It's not like, but study was like really important. But we used to play a lot as well. So I had to, in the early time, manage my time really well. Oh, I've got to finish all this work, the homework or studying, so I can get time to play with my friends, right? Else I wouldn't be allowed to go out. So it was like a really good discipline way of getting stuff done so you can enjoy what you want to do later. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I way over index on playing sport and playing and practicing and things like that to focus too much on studies. But for context, for those people that are listening that may not know, IIT is the top engineering university in school. Like people study for 12 months just to go
it is very competitive. About 1,400 engineering seats, and then 1 million people write the exam to get that 1,400 engineering to go to the college here.
Yeah.
Like 7 IITs in India, right? So
yeah. And, obviously you mentioned you've had this golden touch of being with companies that have all been acquired. What were some of the similarities that you noticed or some of the lessons that you picked up from some of those earlier companies that you thought about applying at Gameface?
The funny thing is, because we are early in the career, you're like a developer mindset. So all you do is, okay, I've got this quantum of work to be done, and you don't really think about business and then startup. You're not in that mind frame. So when the CEO does an all hands, like, oh, we've got acquired today, or we're issuing shares, it didn't mean anything to me. I was like, what is happening? And I was like, oh, I'm gonna get some options, and then I would read those RSAs, like restricted stock options, as, okay, you get X number of shares at so many cents, and it didn't really mean. So I used to go to my manager and it's like, what does it mean? Is, oh, you've got this, and when you want, it's with you. When you want to sell it, when you quit the company, you can sell it. Was the thing. So that was the understanding I had. I didn't have any understanding of like people are raising money, people are becoming rich or whatever. So I was like, it's just like a job. And I think predominantly a lot of people at that time as well didn't really like I would say the mindset wasn't there as an early 20s and 30s engineer to understand really like what the business is about. We just were like happy with the salary and happy with the stock options and so on. But the realization happened when it occurred in the last startup. Like that was a really, really small startup. So when I joined that company, we were like 10 people. And that was like, okay, that is a startup. In my mind, it was like, okay, this is like a startup. And the other companies were like, the other companies which I worked were like had 100, 200, 300 employees. And I didn't really think it was a startup. But this last company I worked was 10 employees, and I was like number 8 or number 7. And I saw how much work gets done and who does what, and everybody's doing everything. And that was my first feel of what startup was. And then I saw that how fundraising happened there, as what was happening, how we were growing, customer acquisition, and that got me thinking like, oh wow, okay, this is something new, and I get this. I can make sense of the world news now. Like when there is news articles like this company got acquired for so many millions, okay, now it makes sense like how it happened, why it happened, and so on. So that realization opened up so many ideas for me at that time. So yeah.
And so what were, you said as a 10th employee, you got to see a little bit more of the origin story, the fundraising, and understand that a little bit more. When did that initial idea for Gameface come about, or what was that initial kernel of an idea for you?
So once the acquisition for Bridgeco happened, which is early 2013s, and then I made a point like I need to move to Australia. So when I came down here, so there was this burning thing about, okay, startups are a thing I've got to have. And during this time, I had a close group of friends. We used to share ideas. But then when I left and came to Australia, I still want to carry on that, but I didn't have a network. So I got my first job at Telstra, but then the scene in Australia were like, it was just like coming up. Startups were like, it was becoming a thing at that time. So there was like Founder Institute, and there were like networking events and stuff. So while I was doing the day job, I used to go frequent these events and made a circle and discuss about the ideas. And slowly, when I had a background in video, so my initial idea was to build something like IMDb X-Ray, where if you didn't know who, so you could just like tap on Brad Pitt's face and it will tell you what happened. So that was my initial idea, and I used to pitch that at every event I went, and I even built a prototype and so on and showed it to a few things, and slowly but slowly it eventually moved to sports through customer talks and investors and mentors and all that stuff. So,
yeah. From what I understand, a big part of that switch was when you joined Startmate. Is
yes,
that right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, Startmate was the defining moment of transitioning from what I had like a vague startup idea to something concrete and something purposeful driven. And Startmate did a good job there to help me focus on what I wanted to build and when I need to pivot.
Yeah. Can you, I guess for early stage founders that maybe haven't gone through an accelerator program or those sort of things, can you talk about what was it specifically around what you experienced at Startmate or being in that environment that helped you, like you said, turn it from a vague idea into a business?
Yeah, so Startmate is an experience by itself. It's very competitive. Back then it was like even more competitive. Like no, it's more now, but so the thing with Startmate is you have a bunch of really cool people around you who've done things. It's founders for founders, right? So they've done things, or they're doing things. They're a little ahead of you, so they exactly know how to poke you in the right direction to get the right answers for you, and the answers you need to hear to take you forward. So at that time there were like cool bunch of Nick Crocker was there, Raynor was there, and Albert from Stanley Snap. So these group of mentors, they would just question your whole validity of a startup. Does it need to exist? What is it you're solving for? And what is your plan to get there? And they would push you. And okay, why haven't you done this? Why haven't you done that? And sometimes that pushes you really to focus on building value very early on.
I think also, I haven't gone through an accelerator program, so I don't know from first-hand experience, but I imagine having a tight deadline that you're demoing at this particular time. Like you said, you've got this cohort of also companies and founders that have been selected into this very selective process. It's very competitive by nature, and so I think the challenge for a lot of companies is there's a million things going on and it's hard to focus on the right things. But I imagine having a concentrated experience like that would really help you hone in on what's really important.
Yeah, it does. I mean, every day you are sitting with a cohort, you're discussing problems, you're hearing problems from other founders on challenges they are facing, either customers, either acquiring engineers or finding the right people, or how do you sell, how do you get that first money, and what are you doing? Moving the needle. And every day is, okay, what did you learn today and how do you apply that to your startup to move the needle?
Yeah. And speaking of fundraising, that was Startmate the first bit of capital that you took up? Yeah,
I had one angel who invested in my idea way before I had a prototype. But then Startmate was after Startmate was my first fundraise journey.
Yeah, and so I think Danny Bandari, who was one of your early investors in your first round of funding, he mentioned he saw you pitch at Startmate. And I guess, with how much machine learning and AI has exploded in the last 12, 18 months, it seems obvious, but you were playing the space 5 to 6 years ago.
Yes, it was. Hindsight is a beautiful thing. So now that I think about it, like I was pitching AI and ML startups back in the day, and I had to face a lot of rejection, especially because first people didn't understand what I was talking about, and then the venture capital ecosystem is really weird because unless they see a 40x multiple or a unicorn thing, no market is big enough. They are looking at a very, very big market. Sports by itself, at that time, I didn't know how to tell a story. Like this could be really big, and then I always like, oh, this is a very niche market. This is a very niche market. It's not right for us and stuff like that. But eventually we got there. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess did Startmate help pull that story out of you?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So the narrative was crafted at Startmate. Yeah.
Yeah. And can you maybe, again, like helpful for founders to understand what did that look like before and what was the story coming out?
The initial vision of Gameface at that time was we are building a software to help elite athletes improve their game. So the target market then was just elite athletes, the top 10 APL teams or top 10 IPL teams and so on, which by definition would limit the market. but the elite market itself is really big. And then the way it changed the narrative through StartMate was like, oh, we're just building analytics software for anybody to get better at the game. So it became from elite to anybody who wants to do well in sports. So that's how the narrative changed. And yeah.
We're going to take a very quick break from this podcast to talk about an important issue, which is the growth of your business. Specifically, how long sales cycles when selling to large enterprise customers can slow down progress for so many startups. Unfortunately, a portion of this is out of your control, but something you can do to accelerate your sales cycles and sell to bigger customers is to demonstrate your security compliance with standards like ISO 27001 or SOC 2. The problem is that achieving compliance can be a big distraction and a large financial and operational drain for your company. Thankfully, our partners for the show, Vanta, can help with this. Vanta automates up to 90% of compliance, getting you audit ready quickly and saving you up to 85% of associated costs. And Vanta scales with your business, helping you continuously monitor compliance, unify risk management, and streamline security reviews. There are over 7,000 fast-growing companies like Atlassian and Dovetail that use Vanta to build trust and prove security in real time. They've been supporters of the show for a while now and are doubling down in their support for our community by offering $1,000 US off their plans. To access this exclusive offer, head over to vanta.com/playbook. That's VANTA.com/playbook. All right, let's get back to this episode. And, obviously we've spoken a little bit about funding. As you referenced earlier, you guys had an exit a little bit earlier. Was it this year? End of last year?
2021.
Oh, 2021. Okay.
Yeah.
I've clearly lost track of time. So congratulations. It was a $25 million USD exit, so about 33 mil Aussie.
Yeah.
You guys didn't raise a ton of capital in the lead up. So from what I understand, it was 1.2 mil that you guys raised. And you raised roughly half in Australia that took 6 months and then half in the US that took 2 weeks.
Yes. It's funny though. The time I was raising funds was probably the toughest time as a founder. Raising funds is the one thing which founder really hates, I think, because it takes away from the things he likes to build a product or solve a problem. Fundraising was a big challenge for me because as a first-time founder, I didn't know how tough it is to raise money. So I probably knocked every VC at that time and spoke to as many angels I could. And my day was like all about pitching and refining my story and being more concise and precise and telling them the traction and then following up and telling traction, all that stuff, and revising my deck so many times. Every investor had a different preference of deck. Okay, where's the problem? Where's the team? Focus on the team. And you get to hear so many perspectives from people in the ecosystems. There's too much noise, right? If you start listening to everybody out there, you will never get anywhere. So now that I know what I did, I'm better equipped to be really slick with what I want to say and how I want to say it. And I think a lot of founders today have the same issue, right? The ecosystem has grown. There's a lot of players in the market. There's a lot of VCs. There are a lot of angels. And the perspective which each of them talk to the founder is totally different, which sometimes deviates from actually helping the founder to confusing him a lot. It was good that a few angels supported me back then. Danny was one of the first ones, and then a few others from Kylie Fraser, and then a few other angels from Danny's friends and network, which helped me get started. And whatever little I raised, it was not much. I raised $200K in the first tranche. And then that I made it last for a year, so I didn't pay taxes on that stuff. And then I ran out of money. Then I did another bridge of about $350 from the same investors, double down. And during that time, all it went was to build traction. And then at one point, we just almost near that experience for the startup. And then I raised another 600 in the US, which was very quick.
So many parts of that I want to pick on. So you mentioned, knowing what you know now, you would be much slicker through the process.
Yeah.
If you had your time again, what would change? So again, for the benefit of founders that are listening, that are hoping to avoid having to learn the lesson the hard way, what would be advice that you have for founders that are currently raising?
Yeah, so my first advice is to get your narrative down to as simple and as succinct as you can. Cut down as many words as you can. Your idea has to be so brief down that it is like you can pitch it in 2 or 5 sentences max, right? I mean, the best example for this was Renong, right? So he's a prolific communicator. So every time I talk to him, I get like nuggets of wisdom. I don't know how he does it, but so I was talking to him about something else, some new idea, and he's like, okay, you just need 3 slides. This is a problem. This is what I'm building, and this is how much I want. That's it. And that was like so well thought of. It is those 3 things. That's it, and you don't need anything else. Anything else is added above and in the next meeting or so on. You can clarify that, but when you're talking to somebody, when you're trying to get interest or gauge interest from early investors and VCs, all you need is this 3 things, and just gauge their feedback, and then you can elaborate, right? Also on the decks now, it has to be very simple wordings, more graphics, more images. But the thing which has changed from me when I was a first-time founder to now is my communication. I try to be as precise and as direct as I possibly can. So it just saves me time, saves me any assumptions which I'm taking up. I just tell them, this is what I want, this is what I need, this is what you need, right? So 3 things, very different. It saves you so much bullshit. Sorry for that, but
I think that as a founder with a brilliant idea, it can be very tempting to showcase your brilliance to other people, and show the depth of understanding that you have and all those sort of things. From the investor perspective, they're getting pitched multiple times a day, and to understand the process internally, they then have to go and speak about this to the rest of the team or filter this through everything else. And so if you have like you said, something that's very brief and easy to remember and easy to tell others about, much more likely to get cut through that way.
The other thing is, when you do that exercise about making it as simple as possible, you get to the crux very quickly. You don't have any fluff. It is this or that. That's it. And if your idea is not, if that simple thing is not enough to generate curiosity or ask more questions about, okay, tell me more, then you've got to go back and work on it so that the next question is, tell me more.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah. And I think you brought up this story as well, but I think it cannot be understated how naive a lot of founders are for the first time. And a lot of people are in the same boat. And you mentioned that you forgot to pay taxes, or didn't realize that you had to pay taxes when hiring employees. Do you want to talk a little bit about that story?
Oh yeah, so sure. So firstly, I'm a new Australian immigrant. I have no expertise in or experience running a business. I've been an operator so far, a developer, and this is like zero experience running a business. I'm not a director of any company or things. I'm new to the system as well. So I raised my first 200K from the angels, and then I didn't realize, I don't know, I read somewhere that if a startup is doing less than $75,000 of business, you don't have to pay taxes. Somewhere I read that. And it's like, interesting. And I never went back and talked to anybody. Like, okay, this is, okay, we're not making money, so we're not going to pay taxes.
Yeah.
Was my understanding. So I hired a bunch of engineers, and I used to pay them. And there was like, I don't know how to do payroll taxes or something. I had zero then. So I just, okay, this is your thing, and divided by 12. And I did that for 1 year, the first 200K, right? And I didn't pay taxes at all. I didn't know. And then at some point, somebody was telling me, okay, who's doing your books? I was like, I'm doing my books. What do you mean you're doing your books? I was like, oh yeah, I keep account of where the money is going. And then they look at my books, it's like, why haven't you paid taxes? I was like, what taxes? And then they're like, you've got to pay your payroll taxes. I was like, do I? And then they're like, yes. And then they filed, the accounting team filed the thing. And then I got a warning letter from ATO saying, this is your first warning, and you've got to pay, and please pay all your arrears as quickly as possible. I was like, okay.
And so what did that process look like? Because, I imagine, like you said, you had 200K and that you've taken as capital, you've stretched that out as far as possible. Now you've suddenly got, I imagine, a sizable tax bill. How did you go about fixing that? Yeah,
so I did 200K. I had like early revenue, very, very little. And that was good enough to show traction to my existing investors. I told them, look, we raised very small, but we've done so much traction. I need some more money. And we did a bridge. And then majority of that bridge, like substantial amount went to the taxes. But then there was some left over to hire more engineers. So I was saved in time, I would say.
Did the investors know that they're
No. didn't know that. Yeah, the good thing about the investors who backed me was like they just wanted to help me. They're like, oh, here's the money, and they would just like, what do you need help with, and they won't interfere with what I'm doing, send me your P&L and all that stuff. Yeah, it was very early on, right? There was nothing there.
Well, I think it's a really good example of just, the grit and hustle that you need as a founder, and just all of the things that you have to figure out. I'd speak to a mutual friend of ours, Adir Schiffman, who we both know quite well. One of the things that he mentioned was that I think he said he met you at an event and you said something to him and you kept hassling him to be involved. But I think, one thing that got him, I guess, across the line in terms of just having you in his broad network was a story that you told him about how you and your wife, everything you guys had to go through, which is, for context, you're Muslim, she's Hindu. Your family was not very approving of that and essentially disowned you. Again, do you want to share a little bit about
that story? So I'm from an Orthodox Muslim family, and my wife is also from a Hindu family, right? So things in India are like when you marry outside your community, it's a bit friction, right? There's a lot of friction out there, and it's primarily driven by people not able to understand the perspective and idealism from the other person's view. So as an Orthodox Muslim, my parents were against people from other communities like marrying stuff, but I had to push really hard to tell them, like, look, I mean, it's our life, and the way I would see is like my next 30, 40 years is to be with somebody who understands me, rather than finding somebody from the same community and then being able to gel with that person is a very personal thing, right? So give it some time, think about it, and you've got to be open as well, and so on. So that was...
How did that conversation go down?
Not very well at that time, but things are well now. So at that time, it was like there's a lot of animosity at that time, which wouldn't actually, my peace of mind was lost. I couldn't think of anything else. I had to get things sorted first and then be able to be productive. So it was important for me to get into an environment where this is possible. And that's how moving away helped that a bit. So if things have improved a lot now, they're all welcoming and all good now. But at that time, it was, I mean, you should understand the perspective of people as well. Like they have seen things, and it takes a little time for them to change their views. It's not like overnight they will be open. You've got to let them grow in, right? You can't just do that. So sometimes you've got to step away for that to sink in. And
yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing that. Like I've had friends from uni that have gone through similar things and maybe chosen the other path, because it is hard when you put in that. And for context, culturally, there is so much community based everything, like life, that so much of it is about how other people perceive you, and shame and reputation, all those sort of things. And so I imagine it's like easy to say it was the right thing, and things kind of take time, but I imagine in the moment it is a difficult.
It is a very difficult. It is very nerve-wracking. It takes a lot of courage standing up to your parents, but it is also about if you've lived in India, there's a lot of this thing with parents where log kya kahenge, what would people say, and it annoys me so much, and it still annoys me today. Like when my mom says, what do people say? Who cares, right? You're living your life, be busy with it. Like, why do you want to care about what people think about something, right? So
yeah. And obviously, as you mentioned, well, actually I'd be keen to double click on that when you said that your wife was the right person for you. What were the things about her that made her the right person, that you knew that it was the other side of this?
Is what I say. I mean, firstly, she is funny. Second thing is she's a good coder.
That helps.
No, seriously, she's really good with coding, and then she's a really good person. She's very supportive and understanding and funny sometimes. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I also know that when you decided to leave Telstra and start Gameface, I believe your wife was pregnant.
Yep.
At the time.
Yeah.
Which is again, an additional layer of just difficulty to kind of throw into the mix.
I can't even start. Where do I start with that? So I came to Australia in 2013. So for 4 years, I worked with Telstra, networking and building my network. But when I decided I wanted to step out and do full-time, It was 2017. And my daughter was born in 2017 in Feb, and I started the company 2016 November, I think, officially going full time on it. And then we applied for StartMate, and StartMate accepted in July 2017, I think. So my kid was like 6 months, right? And it's a funny story. When I got the call that I've been shortlisted to StartMate around 1, I was in India. And I told Nick Crocker at that time, I was like, mate, I'm in India. How do you really, can you not do telephonic thing? Is no, it's a 1-to-1 mentor session. So you've got to talk to 5 different mentors, and they're all going to vote. And that's how you would, if you get a lot of votes, then you would get to StartMate. And it's important for you to be here. So, so I just been there to India with a kid. And I told my dad, Dad, I need to go to Melbourne for a day, and then I'll be back. What do you mean a day? I was like, no, I have to like really do this thing. It's really important. So they're like, okay. So I flew in to Melbourne, had that one-on-one session with the StartMate crew, and then I flew back. And then Nick Crocker said, all right, you got it, and it was good. So then I came back after the vacation, and then I told my wife, look, I've got to move to Melbourne, because at that time it was not remote. StartMate used to be in person. So we used to have a Melbourne cohort and a Sydney cohort. I didn't get into Sydney cohort. And so when I applied to Sydney cohort, Nikki Shewag was like, your idea is good, but you need to get more traction, and the same thing. And then he's like, okay, next time you apply, you'll make it, I think so. You're right there. So I applied, and I got into Melbourne one. And then I left my kid and the 6-month-old kid and my wife all by herself in Sydney, and I moved to Melbourne for 3 months to do StartMate.
Wow. And I think that kind of shows the support that you're talking about with your partner and understanding. And it's we've spoken about this on the podcast before, about how the founders are like wired in a particular way, and so doing this is just something they almost can't help. But your partners, for better or worse, get dragged into that.
I'm so thankful to her, to being supportive. I mean, I can't even imagine the hardships or the things she would have to deal with by herself when I was back in Melbourne. Yeah, hats off to her for supporting me.
Yeah. And it's something that Adi mentioned about you as well, and something that kind of has come up a couple of times in everyone that I've spoken to about you. Adi said you've got an unreasonable amount of persistence and resilience in the face of things that probably wouldn't make sense for a lot of people. So like you said, just facing down the barrel of a lot of those sort of things, sometimes it is easy to just go, you know what, this is too hard, I'm tapping out. Like, where did that come from for you?
I don't know. Maybe all the Indian parent DNA stuff, like nagging things. You won't believe, my mom is the biggest demotivator, you would say. Whatever you do, right? What's there and that. They won't acknowledge the thing, and they always strive for a better one, right? So if you say, oh, I got on the StartMate, I'm doing so many business, right? So what? So that's like a motivation deep down, right? I've got to do something very big, something my parents are proud of, right? I think that's the mentality a lot of Indians come up with. Nothing is good for them, for their parents. And then, I mean, I am very persistent. That is my superpower. Like, I don't give up very easy. And I wouldn't say die. Unless I've exhausted all things, I would still find one thing we should really try. I mean, that is one thing I'm really happy that I have, is to never give up. And I mean, thankfully for that thing, because I've got so many rejections, and I never understood why when I was doing that business, and the tech was really good and the team was really good. I just knew there was something there, and I wouldn't leave that. And thankfully I didn't, and I stuck with it, and eventually it paid off. Yeah.
There's definitely survivor bias with that, and it is really tough to know when is the right time to, like, how do you know it's just around the corner and you just need to try that one more thing, or you just need to do that, versus actually you're like flogging a dead horse and it's better for you and everyone around you to call it quits.
I think founders, the one quality which I really like is being persistent and being resourceful, right? Those are the two things. And persistence, there are different types of persistence. One is never give up, and you don't look back and it's just like, oh, this is going to work, and having a blind belief. That is wrong. Persistent as in, what else can I try? How do I survive to another day, to live another day or fight another day is a different. I'm that second, I'm the later one, where, okay, if this didn't work, then how do I change something, either the business or either the way I'm presenting or the way I'm positioning it. There's so many different probabilities and permutations and combinations you can try before you say, this is like dead end, right? The other thing which I really respect is people who've done this and give up, right? So they're like, I'm calling it quits because I've tried all that stuff. And I respect that because they've done what they could and they've learned so much. I'm sure next thing they start is going to be like a massive success, because the times you try, you're opening up your brainwaves and you're just opening up neural pathways where something magical is going to happen. Something builds up, your character builds up, or your thinking becomes better. All that stuff. If you didn't go through this, you won't know that.
You would have heard me say many times on this podcast before that I am such a big believer in surrounding yourself with the right people. And that's why I'm delighted to partner with Sender. Sender is the OG startup accounting firm in Australia, catering to all stages of your business life. If you're busy running a startup, you don't always have the time to balance your own books or do forecasts, and instead you can fully outsource your finance function to give you the time, energy, and resources that you need back to do what you do best, which is growing your business. They have a dedicated focus on founders, funders, and startups, and have an experienced team that can help you with everything from managing your tax to balancing your books to even helping with your exit strategy. I trust and use them with all of my businesses and can't recommend them highly enough. To find out more or to speak to Gareth and the team, head over to sender.com. That's SCENDAR.com. All right, let's get back to this episode. You spoke about the persistence. I believe it was you did a deal with Virender Shewag, which eventually led to the acquisition.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
So our traction story is really, really one thing which is, I don't know, fortunate or timely, I should say. So we did the first pilot with Cricket Australia, which got into good reviews with the network in sports. So from Cricket Australia, we got a word in with FIFA. The Victoria University guys were doing some study with FIFA on accuracy of tracking, and that's how we got into that circle. From FIFA, we got into circles with FC Barcelona and Chelsea and so on. And then while we were doing this, cricket is my first love as well. So it was all inbound. So we one day got a inbound lead from our website saying, I am from Virender Shewag School of Cricket and I'm the CEO. I would like to talk to you. And I thought it must be like some guy who's wanting to understand what we are doing and stuff. And then I went on a call with him and he's Virender Shewag really wants to like white label your technology in India and we should be discussing about it. And then slowly, it's a new thing again. So you're talking to a celebrity, Indian cricket team, ex-Indian cricket team guy. He's a celebrity. He does a lot of deals and all that stuff. And this is the first time you're talking to somebody like a rich lister or a rich guy, right? So how do you deal with it? Who teaches you how to talk to a superstar, right? And you just have to pick it up. I didn't know what I was doing. So when Virender Shewag came on the Zoom call, I was mom and my wife was in another room. And Virender Shewag was talking to me. He's like, okay, how are you doing? Where are you from? Which part of Bangalore are you from? And I was like, and then talking like that. And then it took me like a few seconds to understand, like I'm talking to Virender Shewag, talking about business he's interested in. I was like, okay. Okay, then I got into talking to him. And then my wife, after the call, my wife was like, he's trying to be as pleasant as he can be. He's making you comfortable talking to you. And why aren't you responding? I was like, I'm just dumbstruck. Yeah, but it was a good deal though. But then you learn a few things about that. So that world of the rich athletes and the superstars, the way they talk is so different to ordinary people. They're like, okay, this is what I want to do. They don't talk numbers. They're like, this is the idea. This is where I see your tech coming in. This is how it's going to play out. I'm going to use my network to reach out so many people in the thing. I've got my schools. I've got my school kids using it. All that stuff. And they don't talk numbers, margins or anything. They're like, what do you think about it? I was like, yeah. And then somebody else steps in and talks about the business. But these guys are like, oh, this is the vision. This is where I want to see it going. And I was like, okay.
Yeah. I think that's really good advice in terms of just understanding your audience and what you need to sell them.
Yeah.
To your earlier point, if you tried to pitch them the numbers and all those sort of things, I probably would have just disengaged them in some way. But just understanding what's the purpose of that first meeting and what do you need to get a follow-up.
Yeah, I mean, if I were haggle with him, I was like, oh, give me 10 cents for a minute or so on. Like, you would just like, wait, I'm not even talking to you right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what kind of happened afterwards that led to the acquisition deal?
So once we did the cricket deal with them, which is white labeling our solution, we were head down building it for him. And then the news got out, and one of the investors in the States at that time is into tennis. And he used to run our tennis magazine, and then he was instrumental in buying up the Indianapolis tennis tournament as well. So he was well connected in tennis. And it's like 2018, I think, when we did the cricket one, and it's like, oh, this could easily translate to tennis very well. Let me talk to a few people and see if there's an interest in that, like somebody wants to do it for tennis. And then we got in touch with Slinger, who used to do the ball machine for tennis, and they're like, oh, they were a hardware business, and they're like, oh, this is a SaaS component of our hardware business. It gels really well for us to acquire you, so we can have hardware and software. And that's how the conversation began.
Yeah. And obviously there's so much talk and conversation that happens in the lead up to getting to an exit. Everyone imagines that day when they get the inbound and you're getting to that sort of negotiation stage. I know that we've had off the record conversations about some of your experience through that and just some lessons. And so I think it might be beneficial for the audience to just understand, having gone through what you went through, and obviously you did well, but could have, in hindsight, done things a little bit differently. What are some of the lessons, or even just like warning signs, that you picked up through that process that you would do differently next time?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things. This is my first acquisition, or my first company, first acquisition. A lot of this is, at least from my very limited experience with it, is you've got to have your investors and mentors really, really aligned with your goals. If you get investors who are not aligned, they would try and lead you to a path which is beneficial for them, not necessarily for you. As the M&A process started, I was introduced from my investors as well in a good way, that this would lead to something beneficial for everybody. And from the time when we got the letter of interest of acquiring to the deal terms and back and forth and negotiations, I think that could have been done really, really well. It also was that the timing in the market is also important. Mm-hmm. This was early 2020s, 2021s, when it was like the money was still there, the interest rates were down, and there was a lot of free money available, so people could raise a lot of money. And that was, I think, the only time when M&As were happening, because after that the market fell, right? So I was reading through all this stuff and understanding where the market is, and is it better to hold on to your company right now and look down 3 years or a few years down the line and see where it goes, or do we sell down and go with it, right? So while we were doing that, we came to things that, okay, this might be the right time, the valuation seems to be all right, and if you have to do it later on, we'll probably have to raise more capital, and raising capital was one of my things. So I was like, okay, it sounds all right, the valuation is good, the company has the same vision. And then one of the key terms of the acquisition was I would continue to lead the company the way I would see it, and the analytics part, and how I grow the analytics business across multiple sports, and not just restrict myself to tennis. It was one of the key conditions of the acquisition, which they agreed to, and I was happy. So in my head, I was like, oh, I'm still running my company the way I want it. I just don't have to worry about the funding side, right? And it was like a good deal. And I got some money on top, and then my investors did some really well things. The thing which I didn't really very understand really well was it was script only deal, right? So script only deal is like they exchange your equity with their equity. And then although it was a micro cap company at that time when the acquisition discussion was started, but the vision they sold was we're going to be a NASDAQ company, and it's going to be like really skyrocket, because I looked at the products, and the products are really good feedbacks and stuff. I was like, yeah, makes sense. So there was no alarm bells happening. But in hindsight, I think doing a script only deal, you've got to do a lot more due diligence on the company, the operators, the history of the company, all that stuff. So, which I didn't really do well. So
I guess, knowing that kind of experience and like you said, doing the script only deal, how would you think about restructuring that if you were to have your time again?
You would start off with, I would do 50-50 script if the valuation is really well, or more towards cash. Get as much cash as possible. And if it's a public company, then your risk is limited. But if it's not a public company, your risk is really, really high, which is where I was at that time. So in the hindsight, I would do a fairer deal with cash component as high as possible.
And I think you also mentioned, I hope you don't mind me bringing this up, but just the part about getting the right advisors on board as well through that process. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that sort of looks like, and I guess what makes a good and a bad advisor when you're going through the M&A process?
Yeah, so there's a lot of fake operators, I would call it, in the ecosystem. People who say they've done things they haven't done, and they try and position themselves as the gurus of M&A, or I've done this and you can read about me here, and I've changed this deal and so on. But in hindsight, these guys, I mean, unless they have really founded the company from scratch, and I don't trust anybody now. Unless you've done it, please don't even talk to me, right? You must be somebody in corporate, but that is not startup, right? So that is not very different worlds. And then you have a lot of bad actors as well who would try and in the pretext of helping you, they would try and forward their own agenda. Is one thing which I've experienced and I would avoid in the future as well. So the right advisor, in my opinion, is the one who's helping you move the needle either in customer acquisition, or either hiring the right person, or even aligning your own vision, like what you should be looking at, rather than if your vision is limited to a particular market, a right advisor would open that up and say, I mean, you could use this into this market. I mean, so there are ways advisors would expand and be a powerful ally to a founder, rather than just be like piecemeal offering advice, right? So.
Yeah. I think one of the really interesting parts of your story has just been, obviously we've touched on it a couple of times, but your resilience and grit, and just, again, like I think it's one thing for founders who have this vision, believe it in themselves, to follow that. I think the really interesting thing about you is how you've been able to get other people to buy in to that as well. So I think, again, I remember you mentioning a story where one of your key employees came in to join your team at 30K salary, and kind of took more than a 50% pay cut to join.
Yeah.
I think it's a challenge that so many founders face at the early stages when they haven't raised the capital or don't have a lot of capital, but every company has a million things that they need to do. Yeah. How do you think about, or what do you think helped you attract the right talent and people, and for them to buy in where financially it probably doesn't make a lot of sense for them to do that?
That's a really good question. So I mean, as an early stage founder and with limited funding, getting the right team members, early team members, is make or break, right? So you've got to get those superstars, because they are the ones who would move a mile a minute, right? The average player A, player B won't do that. You need superstars, and it's not very evident on finding the superstars. And even if you did find, you don't have the budget to hire them, right? So I was very lucky in that case where I met this guy at an event. He didn't look like a superstar when I first met him, but he just had this curiosity about what I was building. So every time I spoke to him, he was like so curious and listening what I was doing, and he's like, how cool is that? And oh man, this is going to be amazing and stuff. And every time, like it happened over 4 or 5 interactions where he would just catch up and what's happening. Oh, that is so cool. Oh, we did this. I'm like, yeah, that is so cool. I'm like, wow, this is like really nice. And I always thought, how can I involve this guy, because he's so interested in what I'm building. I never got a chance because he was a front end guy at that time. And we had the machine learning guys, me and my co-founder and so on. And we didn't know where to use him, but he was like a really genuine guy, genuine passion for the problem. And then at some point we were like, okay, can you help us build this stuff? And he came and he built it. He built it free of cost, and really nice. It worked really well. And then after we got the funding, the 200K, by the time he had done the front ends for us, like for the demos and stuff. So the demo day front end was this guy who didn't take anything. And so when we did the start made, I got some funding, Then I called him to my house and I told him, look, we've got like a very limited funding, the 75K or something which we got from StartMate. I told him, look, and he was earning 60K at that time. So I told him, look, I mean, you're really good guy, and I really want you to be part of the team as an engineer. I don't know what you're going to do, but you're really awesome, and I like the personality. So would you be okay to come into the team, work full time? I can pay you 30K, and it's no worries. I will do it. So he came on 30K, leaving a 60K job, worked with us for 1 year. And when I got some more funding, I got him back to 60K. And then I think not until 2019 or something where we raised some more funding, he went from 60K to 100K. And now he's doing really well with about 180, 200K. So really nice. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for engineers, talented engineers, that is ridiculous to pay them. But no, it's amazing. And I think it's a kind of also a testament to, again, something that kind of came up in speaking to everyone was how genuine and generous you have been in terms of taking care of your team members and just being very thoughtful and respectful of the whole process. So I think, again, one thing that Danny mentioned was that you had the opportunity to buy back the company too, and could have done that on your own, but I believe what he said was if you were going to do it, you wanted to do it with old investors and give them back those kind of opportunities as well.
Yeah, so I had this during the course, there was an opportunity to buy the company back, and then I could have done it by myself. Like I could say, let me buy the company back. I'm going to give you whatever stock you gave me and then like take it back. But I think it would be wrong to not get my investors in, right? So they've put in the money there. I have the moral obligations to give them more than what they've invested in me. So it would be really wrong to. So if I was to buy the company back as well by any means, I would restructure the cap table to the original one, so they don't have to do anything, and I would continue with that. So they would still have ownership in the company without anything. So
yeah, amazing. Well, mate, you've got an incredible story. Thank you so much for coming on and for sharing your experience and insights. For anyone that wants to find out more, say hello, get in touch. What's the best way?
You can reach me on LinkedIn. Shaik.jalal@gmail.com is my email as well, and I can give them my numbers as well, so in case they want to text me.
I will save you from the spam calls because I get a ton. But Jalal, awesome, mate. Thanks so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Rohit. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on the show.
Cheers. Thanks for listening to episode 189 of the Startup Playbook podcast. As always, full show notes from this interview will be available at startupplaybook.co. I'll be back next week with another episode, but in the meantime, if you enjoyed this interview, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. As always, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.